Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 23 of our Power Reading the Bible. Today we read from 2 Samuel 17 to 1 Kings chapter 1. So the summary of the events in this chapter, really just shows the rebellion of Absalom, David having to run or escape from his throne and his kingdom, his return, and the end actually saw the transition of kingship from David to Solomon. So at the beginning in 2 Kings 17 to 19, we see Absalom's rebellion and David's flight. David literally had to run from the kingdom. So Absalom was able to consolidate support from against David in Hebron. He gathered followers, and sought to usurp the throne, which he was able to do. He had an advisor called Ahithophel, who was a very, should I call him wicked? Because the Bible described him that his counsel was as the counsel of God. Almost like if this man gave you advice, like it will come to pass. Like if you follow his advice, it will show what he has advised you to do would work. Like it was almost, I said, as though it was a counsel of God. So David ran, he escaped, choosing not to fight, surprisingly. I mean, David could have stood with his people and say, fight till the death and all that. I feel that David didn't go that route because he felt that it will lead to the death of his son. And from the beginning, we can see how this all started, right? Like I said previously, all these were things that were brewing. David not attending to the little things that were beginning to happen in his family, front. Absalom killed his brothers. Absalom killed Ammon. Absalom killed, these were things that were already brewing and all that. And then Absalom just kind of, there was a mutiny. Absalom usurped his father's authority, throne, and David had to flee with his family, with his household. Absalom would sleep with his father's wife on the roof. David fled to Jerusalem. He had followers who went with him. He had loyalists who actually went with him. And then Ahithophel counseled Absalom to kind of take a strategy that would actually lead to David's, defeat. But there was a man called Hushai who was a loyalist of David, but was still in the city, and he was able to counsel Absalom to take another route. And based on this advice, he sent people to go inform David. And Ahithophel, who was always used to his counsel being taken, was so distraught and ashamed and angry and whatever it was, went and hung himself because they did not take his advice. Anyway, the rebellion actually culminated in the death of Absalom by Joab, because David had instructed that they should, when they end up finding or catching Absalom, that they should handle him gently, that they should, gently deal with him. But Joab, acting still on personal initiative, killed Absalom. It still goes back to this thing I'm saying about unchecked ambition, which Joab had for some reason. And we see David mourning deeply for, his son, and which even now made Joab angry, because Joab was like, you love those who hate you and you hate those who love you. This was a man who wanted to kill you. Now you are crying and wailing, and the whole palace and whole place can hear you. And the men who fought valiantly for you are now feeling bad. You've made them to lose morale. You need to go there and actually, speak to them. And that was that. So David was restored to his kingdom. He went back and established his, control over Jerusalem and Israel. And then there were still internal revolts like Sheba's rebellion and the military campaigns that he had to do to reinforce his authority. David also executed wise measures in his leadership. This was where there was a distribution of also there was also a distribution of spoils to maintain, loyalty among his people. And during his reign, we see the consequences of earlier sins begin to now have ripple, to now begin to have ripple effect, both affecting the nation and also its family dynamics. Then, thirdly, we see in 2 Samuel 21 how the past sin of Saul against the Gibeonites would rise up. So, years earlier, Saul had put to death Gibeonites, and then years down the line, there was now a famine that occurred in Israel. And when David inquired of the Lord, it is revealed that the famine was as a result of a retribution on Saul's blood guilt against the Gibeonites. So when the Gibeonites were asked that, okay, so what can we do? Their justice was that they demanded that 7 of Saul's sons be killed. Innocent sons that knew nothing. They had no business with what their father did. They were killed as compensation for what their father did. And then the Bible now said the story of Rispa. She was a concubine of Saul. One of her sons were among those who were executed or had to be executed. But the Bible says that she protected these bodies. In the night, in the fall, in the day, she chased away wild animals from eating them. She chased away birds, and that she did this for 5 months over all the bodies, because these bodies were exposed. They were on where they were expected. Nature should just take the course, and such compassion of a mother. She didn't do it for just the body of her son, all sons, Saul's sons. And that when David heard this, David was moved that she stood in vigil over the corpse, just showing the loyalty and compassion that she had. And David was moved, and then the bodies were eventually, laid to rest. And then lastly, in First Kings 1, we now see, at the ending of, David's life, we see how Solomon was enthroned, because Adonijah actually enthroned himself, as with the help, of course, as usual, of some key people put himself as king. By this time David was already weak and getting old, and then enthroned himself. And then through the initiative of Nathan the priest, he was able to go inform Bathsheba that, see, this is happening, it has to be your son. And she was able to inform the king. And also Nathan came in, and David now said that Solomon should be made king. And we see it just climax in Solomon being actually, or taking the place of his father as king, and weeping, and sitting upon the throne, of his father. There was just a lot of story of, usurping the throne, and, rebellion, just a lot of chaos within David's family. It was quite a lot. It was quite a lot. Thirst for power, ambition, and all that were just, playing out a lot. The number one key insight I have here is, you reap what you sow, even across generations. I'm saying this in light of what Saul did. There is no way Saul would have, I'm sure when he was doing it, I don't know, but there's no way he would have thought that down the line, my sons would be killed. Do you see? Down the line, my sons would be killed. Saul's actions against the Gibeonites, the consequences didn't happen until years later. As a matter of fact, there was a spiritual aspect to it before they even lost their life, because the Bible says there was a famine, first of all. Do you understand? There was a famine. And when they inquired, they said it was because Saul sinned against Gibeonite. Like, what Saul did caused nature to cease. And then his sons had to, suffer for it. The world operates on the principle of sowing and reaping. Unchecked wrongdoing might not affect just the sinner, but and the sad part is, many times it is the lineage, the generation to come, that suffers the consequences of the actions that their parents and what we have done. Yeah. The second is leadership requires courage, wisdom, and discernment. David demonstrated restraint and patience while handling Absalom, showing that he showed a lot of wisdom in allowing God to prevail. David was not rash. It was not like, let's go to battle. He really could have done it. Like, you could see him show a lot of restraint, like packed his family and was running. He could have, I feel honestly, that David could have fought back and killed Absalom and killed, but he didn't want to go that route. I think there was also something about him being assured, because God had told him that I'm giving you this throne. Do you get? And I think he was just assured that this wasn't the route he was, supposed to take. Strategic measures like, God using Ushai to counter Ahithophel's counsel, and also, having what do you call it now? Show the importance of, counsel and discernment in leadership. So God using Yishai shows the importance of us when we are leaders having very good counsel. How counsel can destroy or make or strengthen our leadership, our throne. Do you see? And the last is unchecked ambition and human schemes must yield to God's plan. And in the end, we can see that God's plan will always prevail. In all this, it wasn't said anything that Solomon was trying, Solomon was whatever. God's plan had always been Solomon. And all those things that was going on, I'm sure God was just looking. I think it was just the devil causing distance. It just caused, whatever. But in the end, God's plan would actually always prevail. It would always prevail. So from these stories, we can see the interconnectedness of things, of scenes, of family dynamics, of leadership choices. We can actually see how all of them kind of are interconnected to each other. So what we sow affects generations, whether we see it or we don't see it, it does. There should always be a place for wisdom and patience and discernment in our choices, in our lives, in our leadership, and God's plan would always prevail. That is the end of our insight for 23, day 23. See you in day 24. Bye.